All right, welcome. So I am Tony Chirinos. I chair the Arts and Letters Committee. Every year we have a theme for Arts and Letters, and this year is Hope, which is helping others project empowerment. And when we started this, the first organization that I thought about was CubaOne. And the reason why I know CubaOne and Daniel Jimenez is because two of my students actually participated in this project. Alexis and Allison. And I thought that what better way than to have them come in and talk to you guys about this amazing organization. And that's all I'm going to say, because I think that they're here for that reason, is to teach you on what this means. So thank you for coming.
I'm Daniel Jimenez. Thank you for coming and for listening to us today. I started CubaOne Foundation 3 years ago with 4 other Cuban Americans. CubaOne Foundation offers a new generation of Cuban Americans a chance to give back to Cuba, build relationships with Cuban people, and explore cultural connections through high-impact trips to Cuba. We offer free trips to Cuban Americans that are millennials to go to Cuba and reconnect with their heritage. Over the last 3 years, we've taken 100 people to Cuba. We've reconnected 38 families that hadn't met their families before. We've started 58 projects that are beginning to build bridges across our community here in Miami and our peers over in Cuba. Today we have 3 of our alumni that are coming in. I'll introduce 2 of them now and Jenny Lee when she gets here. The first is Joseph Joseph Genovese, who started Guayabera Clothing, the modern guayabera. Second is Ruben Rojas. He's the founder of a project called Others Oceans that deals with reconciliation and international humanitarian projects. I'll have a few questions that we've kind of come up to get with together, but this is really a conversation for you. So after we're through with those, we'll open that up to questions from the audience. So first question is for Joe. You make modern guayaberas. How does a Cuban shirt project help and empower others?
Hello, everybody. Hola, as I like to say to most of my customers and my people. I created guayabera clothing about 6 years ago. For those of you who don't know what the guayabera is, I'm sure you do. It's the Cuban shirt, what's considered the Cuban shirt, the Latin shirt, or as Google likes to call it, the Mexican wedding shirt. For me, though, I grew up in North Miami, in Miami, Aventura, in the 80s. So this type of shirt for me was the norm. It was honestly my daily clothing for what I saw my family wear. So as I grew up, I connected this shirt to my culture. And what I mean by that is this shirt is symbolic of who we are, of who our heritage is, who our culture is. So I needed to make sure that that continued. It didn't die off with millennials, which was kind of happening. So I created a company and I created this business completely based on the concept of collaborations and empowering ourselves to appreciate our culture. And I'm not very eloquent when it comes to this, but I like to show off. And I like to show off with what I'm wearing. I like to show off the fact that I'm Latin American. So all these things concluded in a clothing line. So with that, I don't know how much more time I have.
Take as much as you want.
Awesome. With that, like I said before, I base my entire company off of collaborations. I'm an artist, I'm a designer, I'm an illustrator, but there are millions of others that are better than me and deserve this chance to do this. So really what was the most pivotal part in what I'm doing was going to Cuba last year with the CubaOne Foundation, which was a blessing, something that you don't think would actually happen, but did happen. And in doing this trip, I kind of realized what it really meant to be Cuban. I grew up extraordinarily proud of being Cuban, overly proud of being Cuban, but I had no reason for it, other than the fact that I was Cuban. Going to Cuba and experiencing the culture firsthand, connecting with the artists there that are just like me, but with less pens and less paper. So it really connected with what I was doing in the beginning was collaborating, but I was collaborating with anybody, to now collaborating with Cuban Americans, Latin Americans, and telling their stories along with promoting the clothing line and promoting this Latin culture. So it's two-part. It's be proud to be Latin, wear a guayabera. It's not an old Cuban man shirt, the way they're coming out now. And the fact that we're providing a revenue stream for these artists, wherever they are. We have artists in the UK, Nicaragua, Cuba now, obviously, some amazing projects coming up. But that you can make a living off of drawing. And a lot of us here already know that. It's not uncommon for us. There's art schools and all of that. But in some of these other countries, especially where I get my shirts made, which is actually in Mexico, a lot of this stuff is out of the norm for them. They don't understand that their graffiti or their quick drawing can feed them for a month, can feed them for the next 5 years if it's something that's beautiful. So that's kind of what I did with the Cuban shirt. Let's promote our culture, our heritage, and help everybody in the meantime and grow from there. Did I answer it?
Yeah, if you could tell us a story of kind of what's up here behind you too.
So last year when we went to Cuba, Ruben here next to me was actually our tour guide. And he provided a lot of the experiences in Cuba that meant the most to me, quite honestly. The picture behind me is of an artist named Peli. He's from San Cristobal, Cuba. He is what's called a naive artist. He taught himself using melted crayons and oil mixtures and whatever he could find in the city of San Cristobal. So when we went there, it was, I think, our first stop, and it was the most humbling experience of my life. I mean, small family, beautiful artwork all over the place. You can tell they weren't used to seeing so many young Americans, some of us completely naive to what's happening and what's going on in our surroundings there, because it was all very new for us. But they treated us like family. So being there for more than 20 minutes, I realized, okay, this is what it felt like back in the 80s when my grandparents were making pernils and doing, these big dinners. It felt just like that. So being a guayabera designer and him being an artist, which was the main point of my company to begin with, was to collaborate, to tell the story. So this piece you see here, I fell in love with as soon as I saw it. And I can tell immediately what the story was when I saw it. Are you wearing it?
I am, yeah.
Awesome. So he's actually wearing the shirt. It's called Belly Beyond the Stars. It's a story of his wife asking for the stars, and she gets the stars, of course. But then she wants the moon. So he climbs back up on a ladder and gets her the moon. It's a romantic story that, to me, is timeless in the Cuban culture. Is that you take care of your family no matter what. No matter what they ask for, you're going to try to get it. Our first inclination is to do it, not to figure out ways of not doing it. And to me, that's the most Cuban thing there is no matter what they think you can't do, we're going to do it. And no matter how long it takes, we're still going to do it. So that was a very personal story. To me, the most meaningful piece we have in the collection. We have over 50 shirts, but this one to me was the most important. And it came from CubaOne, which I'm very proud to say.
Great, thanks, Joe. And I think we're going to go to Jenny Lee next as she walks in the room. But to introduce Jenny Lee is a superwoman. She founded JLPR, a PR firm based in Little Havana. She started 305 Cafecito, 305 Day, and also started the Lay Arts District. We're going to jump straight into a question for you.
Thank you. Is this on?
I think this is switched to.
Hi.
So I'm sure everybody here has heard about 305 Cafecito time. You've also founded all these other things and at the same time have started a family. So where does the superwoman known as Jenny Lee come from?
Thank you so much, by the way. I don't consider myself a superwoman by any means, but thank you so much. I come from Hialeah, born and raised. I actually went to this campus a long time ago when I lived in Kendall. But I was born and raised, you know, my family's Cuban, hardworking family, like a lot of our families. And they really instilled in me that if you worked hard, that your dreams can come true. And I've carried on that work ethic and that mentality throughout my career. I am a Miami Dade alum, so I had to represent today. Yeah, I've always worked really hard, and I've always been much about collaboration. So for me, that is key. Collaborating with others is really what amplifies and really catapults any idea that you have. So I'm always big on telling people that I haven't done it alone, and you know, really we can't do it alone. We have to enlist that team, we have to enlist those allies. So while I often get the credit for a lot of the work that I've done, it's really been because of these collaborations and the people that have really helped amplify the work that I do that's really made it bigger than anything I could have created on my own. So thank you.
When you started, I wonder if you could tell us how you started 305 Cafecito, and what was originally maybe like a branding idea has turned into a community across Miami. Maybe talk about that a little.
So 305 Cafecito started as many ideas do, you know, they just come to you. And it happened to be 305 in the afternoon when I was at a ventanita asking a mutual friend of mine and my sister's, you know, what time it was. And we were having Cafecito, we had just finished having a meeting. And he says, oh, it's 3:05. And I was like, oh, that would be the perfect coffee time for Miami. You know, like London has tea time. Like, why can't we have a cafecito time? And, you know, that's just such a common denominator here in Miami. It doesn't matter if you're Cuban American or not. Like, you walk into a room with a colada and you instantly make friends. You know, so we started it as a hashtag, and we just thought it would be funny to make 3:05 the time, Miami's official coffee break time. And then other people started to hashtag it themselves, and it started to really become a thing. So we opened a Facebook page, a Twitter page, an Instagram. And then I thought, well, you know, this was when influencer marketing was just starting. Like, nobody was really even talking about hiring influencers or using influencers as a marketing channel. And I really thought, well, this could be something that can act as a platform to promote like our unique culture, you know, our unique U.S. Hispanic culture, and of course, Cafecito. So a lot of the posts are about Cafecito, but you'll also see posts about Gao Bakery, which is a local bakery, third-generation bakers.
Turn left.
I'm already here. Sorry, guys. But yes, going back to 305 Cafecito. So we work with Café La Llave, we work with Nespresso, we work with Starbucks, and really it was just a hashtag that really grew, and now we use it as a platform and a marketing vehicle to work with other different brands that really resonate with our audience. So it's just a way of celebrating our community, but it just grew because other people resonated with it and started sharing. And it's all about consistency. If you're doing anything on social media, like it's really about building that audience and posting frequently and really seeing what your audience likes and posting according to that audience. Mm-hmm.
And now we'll move over to our third panelist, and someone who's done more, I think, than anyone in our community to help people in Cuba. So Ruben Rojas, you're from Hialeah, and you told me before that you think of yourself as an underdog. How have you turned being an underdog into a success?
So yeah, I'm from Hialeah, and just touching upon a little bit of American history and Cuban history. The United States, it's the world power right now. It's extremely influential country. Is not the underdog, but it was. So Cuba is in many senses an underdog. It's a David and Goliath story, trying to gain a sense of independence as well. Hialeah has always been independent somehow. It's always been very different. And I think between the Miami community, people see Hialeah as like the end of a joke. Whether going to high school or even going to college, you say, oh, I'm from Hialeah. And it's not just Hialeah, it could be Liberty City, it could be any other neighborhood. You tend to think of yourself as I'm just maybe an immigrant, or maybe I'm just son of an immigrant. Before I was 18, actually, I never thought I would leave this country. My parents were working class. I never thought I would travel. Traveling was for someone that was well off and was beyond working class. So fast forward until now, I've worked in about 60 countries, and now I work doing aid relief and community work in Cuba, which is very difficult to do anything. So I think it's very important sometimes when you're in the underdog to understand yourself, understand your history, and actually that ends up being your strength. It ends up being your power, your superpower, I guess you can call. So I'm still a guy from Hialeah. I'm still very proud to be Cuban American. Lejung, La 44, that's East Hialeah. I love my neighborhood, and I thought it was very important from everything I've done to give back.
And you just got back from a relief trip to Cuba following the January tornado that hit Havana. Can you talk about that a little?
Yeah, so tornado hit Cuba recently. I'm sure a lot of you saw it in the news. About 10,000 people were affected. People have completely lost their homes, completely flattened. Many people have died. And CubaOne organization and another organization called Inspire Cuba both contacted me. And we fundraised money together, and I went with about $7,000 with relief aid, and I worked with local organizations, local young people like you and I. There was a group called Cara a Cara, Face to Face, that was self-organized, which is unheard of in Cuba. So it was very exciting. It's always exciting working with CubaOne and Inspire Cuba, Cuban Americans here. But working with young people in Cuba, self-organizing, which is unheard of after such a disaster, and doing good, helping people that have lost everything. So the trip was incredible. We went to 4 neighborhoods, bought rice makers, blenders, baby food, a little bit of everything. I went, did interviews. I do philanthropy and photojournalism. And it was very moving. And to come from the U.S. and do that there is very, very special. The photo that you see behind me, that's the back of my head. And I was interviewing actually a man that fought the Cuban Revolution with Fidel. I didn't expect meeting him because I was going from house to house, and I was actually, this isn't regla, I was working with a father of a church. Usually he has direct relationships with the community. I was interviewing him, and his stories were incredible. I would call him the Cuban Popeye because he had an accent like that. I'm like, so how was the tornado? How's your experience? And when I do these type of interviews, I try to be as sensitive as possible. He's like, tornado, I didn't feel anything. I don't care. Give me another one. Like that. He was like a Popeye. And then he's like, no, because I used to be a sailor. I'm like, you are Popeye. You're the Cuban Popeye. So kept speaking to him, and he told me actually how he went through the mountains with Fidel. He fought the revolution, and this is interesting as a Cuban American. My grandfather died fighting against the revolution. He was tortured. He was in prison. He was starved. This is the other side of the story. So approaching this requires a lot of processing. It's very, very, very complicated. But his story is valid, his story is important. He fought for something that he believed in. So did my grandfather. It was just a completely on the other side. But here I am, kind of as an extension of my grandfather, giving back, helping him. And I think that speaks so much more of just trying to fight him. Instead of trying to fight him, just trying to understand him. And I think these are the bridges that we need. Interviewing, he even, we have a video that he sung a song. He wrote a song, and he sung it for me. And he's actually missing a leg, and he has a little lump. And then you know when you're singing a song, you kind of like that. His foot going like that was the little lump, and he was like this, and he was singing. Like, I can't believe this man wrote this song. He's about 90-something. And this is just one of the 30 people that I interviewed in Cuba. So it was extremely moving.
All right, I was going to do a little bit of a lightning round now about some things in Miami and some things in Cuba. So very quickly, don't think about it too much. Pitbull or Gente de Zona?
What song?
And this one.
I'm gonna have to go with Pitbull, sorry.
Second one is South Beach or the Malecon?
Malecón.
Yeah, Malecón.
It's absolutely amazing place. The entire city's out there in the evenings.
Yeah.
And then yellow cabs or almendrones?
Almendrones,
Almendrones.
right? Yeah, almendrones.
The old American cars.
Yeah. And the conversations you have in them. It's amazing. Yeah.
Next question, this is for everyone here, but could get a little emotional. You heard Ruben's voice cracking a little bit. Every time I answer this, I get emotional too. But as Cuban Americans, we're sons and daughters of immigrants and exiles. Our families made tremendous sacrifices for us to be here. First, can you tell us how your family got to the United States? And second, how do you think about the opportunities that decision gave you?
Well, my mom came on a 10-foot boat when she was 9 years old with my grandfather and my grandmother and her then 11-year-old brother. And I have an 8-year-old who turns 9 next month. And I thought about him so much, and I thought about the courage that my grandparents had so much when I was in Cuba with CubaOne in January. And I just can't imagine going into the middle of the ocean in the dark of night, because you escape at night when no one can see you. Just if you've ever been in the middle of the ocean at night, it's just pitch black. And I kept thinking about that and just having that courage. I feel like it's my duty to give back to my community because of that sacrifice that my grandparents made. And my mom was little when she came here, so she was basically raised here, and she's very much Cuban American, even though she's born in Cuba. But because she came so young, at 9 years old, she grew up here, and she also had a lot of opportunities. So my mom also instilled in me that we have to always honor our roots because of her own experience too. And she speaks perfect English, but in the house we would only speak Spanish. And really, I think it's not only the opportunities that are afforded to us because we're in this country, as opposed to being in Cuba, where things are a lot more difficult, but it's also the hustle, that work ethic, that you need to make it happen. I'm gonna make it happen, because you're just not making things happen because you want a livelihood or because you want your next paycheck. You want to make things happen because you want to give back, because you don't want to take for granted the sacrifice that your family made. And I think that's what really sets us apart as U.S. Hispanics, as children of immigrants, is that we know the sacrifices that our families have made, and we don't take it for granted. And it's very easy to take it for granted, but being in Cuba, thinking about my son, thinking about the sacrifices that my grandparents made for me to be here today, it really changed something in me that made me think more about being purpose-driven versus just being driven by ambition, but really being driven by purpose and how I'm going to give back and what my legacy is. And those are things that I necessarily didn't think about as much before, but really just honoring that sacrifice is something that's really prevalent in everything I do. So, yeah.
My story is a little different and not as emotional, I guess. I was told as a young man that my family came over on a plane directly to New York. Whether that was true or not, I had no clue. I was never in the room when they spoke about it. If something came on TV, it was a couple mumbles under the breath, but it was never an issue for the children of the house. So, the whole story of how they got over here and what my grandfather went through, what my father went through, I know some of that story, but it sucks. So, I think what's more important from this question is the opportunities. And I took for granted, without a doubt, the opportunities I was given. I grew up in Miami, in that what was considered the dark side of the Cuban lifestyle in Miami, the drugs and all that stuff. I was a product of that. I had everything I needed and wanted until it was snatched away from me completely when I was 13 or 14. So none of that dawned on me until I was a teenager. That struggle that my mother and I had to go through after that, that's when I realized what I was living before was all nonsense, was all completely fake. So I started counting those blessings. I started taking advantage of those opportunities, and not in a negative way, but just literally taking advantage of what's in front of you, of making sure you follow through on what you want. So now to me, my opportunity is to be able to share all that. I'm sorry, I mean, anybody nowadays can live comfortably. You can eat, you can sleep, you can do whatever you want comfortably. Everybody wants to be a millionaire, and I agree. I would love to do that too. But I would love to have more friends around me that have 100 grand in the bank than be that sole millionaire on a mountain with nothing to care for. So my opportunities are for other people. And it might sound, tchotchke, it might sound fake, but honestly, I have everything I need, and it keeps coming. So why not bring more people into it? And that, to me, is what my whole purpose of my trip last year with CubaOne was. How do I connect with these people and give them the same opportunities that I have? Access to internet on your phone in the bathroom, it's normal for us. They need to walk a few blocks and buy a card and make sure they have power on their phone to go check a Facebook message, if that message came through. So there's a big disconnect from what I grew up with to what the real world is like. And it was enlightening to me. It made me feel better. It made me feel as if I had purpose and direction, and not just a goal of building a business, but a goal of including as many people as I can, and all of us eating from it. So I get emotional when I speak about the opportunities more so than my family, because I'm making my own family now. With these people I work with these artists that I collaborate with CubaOne, those are my family now. And those are the stories that I'm gonna be focusing on.
Oh, yeah, there's a lot of context and a lot of stories. And I consider these people next to me family as well. My mother and my grandmother came in 1968, and they were fleeing the revolution. My grandfather was in prison. He went to school, Fidel Castro. He was fighting against the revolution. And he was in prison, tortured, and killed. The last straw, my grandmother was an orphan of AIDS, learned how to read and write because a group of religious people, Jehovah's Witnesses, taught her that. Religion was illegal, became illegal after the revolution. She had to study the Bible in secret. Then, the last straw for my grandmother was when they wanted to take my mother away from my grandmother and send her to a school in the countryside. My aunt and my uncle came in '62, they were already here, and they went through family reunification. They went through airplane, they started their life here. My mom was 13, and started a new life here. Searched for freedom, like many people do. Searched for home. I didn't talk about Other Oceans. My project, Other Oceans, in essence, is a search for home. It's philanthropy and photojournalism having to deal with the emotionally exiled. Why do I use the term emotionally exiled? Because you don't have to leave a country to feel exiled. I've lived in about 10 countries, I've traveled more than 60 countries, and growing up in Miami, I always knew I had an opportunity to do more. Even though I was from Hialeah, maybe I didn't think I'd get too far, I didn't know what was gonna be of me. But I definitely know I had a lot more opportunity than the people in Cuba. Then leaving Miami, is the best way, I think, that it became a mirror. I was able to look at myself. And I was asked so many things all the time. But are you Cuban or American? Like it was contradictory. But where were you born? What is your family story? Why did they, all of these questions came from people. Something I didn't ask myself maybe when I was growing up in Miami, because everyone was Cuban American. But the more they asked, the more I had to look at myself, and the more I had to look at my own community. So I've shared this story with Daniel. I think one of the most pivotal moments is when I was living in India. I was in the Himalayas, and I met and saw a large Tibetan community. And there was a large painted sign that says, 59 years of exile. Exactly the same years that Cubans have been exiled in Miami. Exactly the same years, and because of communism as well. And they live in India, but they're Tibetan. I've experienced a lot of these communities all over the world, but I think that's the point that I identified the most with immigrants and exiles on the other side of the world, on the roof of the world. I said, we're not the only ones. And a lot of these displaced people are searching for home or creating home. And that is what Miami is. Miami is 80% Hispanic Latino, and this is a very young city. Everyone, even Americans, have come from somewhere else. Our first voters here in Miami were both Bahamian. We have a very incredible history, and it's something we have to embrace. Living in different communities, I've met all different types of people, mixes of people. And it just made me think about Miami even more. Instead of pushing me away from Miami, I said, oh, I've worked with anything. I've worked as an engineer, I've been an English teacher, I studied marketing and international relations. And this just brought me back home. It was a 360. The more I lived away, the more I became an exile, the more I became an immigrant. My family were immigrants. I was born here. I was born in Mercy Hospital, but I became an immigrant myself, and I understood how hard it was to look for home. Living in China, living in Thailand, having to make friends, having to make family, having to trust someone to go to the hospital, getting an operation when they don't speak your language. Estaba temblando. I'm like, I was getting an operation, and I'm like, I want to let them know it hurts, but I think that's international though. Como, ay, como para, stop. But it's a learning experience, and how many people are displaced all over the world? How many Syrians? How many Venezuelans now? How many people all over the world have to deal with this? And that's where Other Oceans began. Other Oceans means, well, it's where a lot of Cuban stories start, because it starts with the ocean. And by evolution, supposedly we came from the ocean. But funny enough, we always go back to the ocean. We always go back to that large place of freedom, of hope. Hope for trying to find our sense of home. So, in essence, my mom and my grandmother's trip ended up fueling my entire mission. Yeah.
Thank you all. We'll have one question left that we'll go through with the group, and then we'd like to open it up to the audience for questions. So if you have questions, think about them, come up. I think we want to do them on the mic so they get captured by the audio. So just start coming up as you have things you want to talk about. So last question, and we'll start at Ruben and come this direction. You guys are all founders and entrepreneurs, and you've all started something in your life that other people would look at and say, that's amazing, that's awesome. What challenges have you faced along the way, and how did you overcome them?
The emotional and psychological challenge, for me personally, is doing something that I believe in and understanding what I should do. Because I feel I've worked in different areas, I've lived in different countries. Sometimes I've had to try to figure out how to make these broken pieces and put these pieces together to create a sort of mosaic. When you look far away, it looks like something, but if you look close away, I'm like, what does this all mean? So I think it's very important to experiment, to explore, to understand your family history, understand your roots, understand your interests and your passions. And even if it doesn't make sense now, it may seem like an obstacle, like how am I gonna live from that? What am I gonna do with this? What you're meant for may not exist yet. And that's what I think that was my biggest obstacle, working in so many different things in so many different ways. I honestly didn't know what I was meant for. I didn't know what to do with everything I had learned. I had learned so much and from so many different people. I didn't know what to do with it. And then it was incredible because it went 360 back. So I think the biggest obstacle was understanding the mission. I'm sure a lot of you will have your own missions eventually, or you already have them. But I think the biggest obstacle is understanding what was the mission, because that's very important to me, and how to execute it. And once I understood what I'm meant to do does not exist yet, it gave me a freedom to do anything. And it gave me freedom to do what was my story, what was my family story, and what was people's story all over the world.
My biggest obstacles, and when you asked it, I thought of two immediately. The first one is probably what we all go through, is direction. That to me is the biggest villain in all of our lives, is what direction do we go in. But for me, it was that I wanted to go in all of the directions. I felt, and I still feel, guayaberas belong everywhere, whether it's weddings, churches, funerals, business, meetings, theater, it doesn't matter. I feel guayaberas belong everywhere. So at first my direction was pretty just all over the place. I had all these things I wanted to do, but none of them in any sort of order of importance. So I sat back and remembered what I learned a decade before and started building my business plans for each individual direction I wanted to go into. So in essence, my business is split into about 6 different businesses. And that's probably why it's taken me so long to become crazy rich and famous and philanthropist and all that. I'm okay with that. Like I said, I'm comfortable and I have everything I can ever ask for. But I need to build these directions so that I can help other people, so that I can continue doing what I really want to do, which is working with as many people as possible and telling as many stories as possible while making money from it. My second obstacle was stereotypes because of what I make. So old school Cubans don't wear guayaberas, and that's crazy to think that. But they went to Montessori school, or they went to Catholic school, and that's what they had to wear, and they're traumatized from it. So you would think making a Cuban shirt, yeah, that's my audience, Cuban people. No, not at all. The ones that appreciate the culture, the ones that I connect to, the type of people that I'm trying to bring light to, those are the people that understand the guayabera done this way means more than just a piece of cloth put on your back. It's about our culture. It's about who we are. It's about our family and the bonds that we have with them. So, the stereotypes, we'll get over that. That's, sticks and stones, who cares? The direction, though, that can keep you in a loop of non-completion for months. 8 months trying to figure out what to do when it's all in front of you already. That was my biggest problem, and I'm still overcoming it, because when I get an idea, I want to do it, and I want to do it as big as I can. But I still have all these other ideas marinating, and I need to let them cook before I serve it. So that's my focus.
That's such a good question, because I think, all of us, when we have an idea or an inspiration, we're always going to have obstacles, and we envision success as like this direct road, like I'm going to go to school, I'm going to do this, and if I check off all of these things on my to-do list, I'm going to make it, right? The proverbial make it. And there's that saying, like, fake it till you make it. And the problem with faking it until you make it is that you deal with imposter syndrome. You deal with, who am I to co-found the Leo Arts District? Like, I'm just a nobody, right? And I think a lot of times like those insecurities hold you back from like really fulfilling your own potential, that really you don't know until you get there, right? So for me, what I deal with a lot is sometimes the self-doubt, that inner critic that's like, who am I to do that? Or, oh, people are gonna laugh. That's such a ridiculous idea, an art district in Hialeah, and now we have all of these amazing events that people are coming to. We had like 8,000 people there on 305 Day, which was amazing. So sometimes that self-doubt can be very crippling. This is 305 Day last year. This year we had Trick Daddy as our headliner, and it was just such a fun event. But for a long time, a lot of these ideas that I've had were kind of sitting on the back burner because of self-doubt. And I think that anyone in any space, whether it's in the creative marketing space where I work, anyone who has an idea, I think self-doubt can be very crippling, and you have to be crazy enough to believe in your dreams, whatever they may be. And going back to what you were discussing about opportunity, and being that we're in Miami Dade College's tagline is opportunity changes everything, and it really does. When you have that opportunity, when you have an opportunity, you really owe it to that opportunity to see it through and not doubt yourself. Like, you have to kind of step outside of yourself and talk to yourself. Like, I give myself pep talks all the time. And if you ever need a pep talk, I will be there for you. Because you really need to convince yourself that, hey, if I don't do it, who's gonna do it? If I have an idea and no one else is doing it, why not? And really think that, okay, if I don't know how to do it, we have Google now, we have YouTube, and we have mentors, we have allies, we have people that we can turn to when we need inspiration or some direction. So that inner critic, silencing that inner critic is important, because it can cripple you, and it could really prevent you from fulfilling your dreams and fulfilling your potential. So silencing that inner critic, I think, is super important. And also going back to what I was saying earlier, enlisting those allies and those people that can really help you, and building that community around your idea, so that way you can amplify it and reach the most amount of people. Because whether you're selling something or you have a restaurant, it really goes back to building that audience. So enlisting those people and really building that community is key. And you do that by, cross promotion, by giving back, by, I help you, you help me. Like the saying in Spanish, una mano lava la otra, y las dos lavan la cara, It's really important that you collaborate. Collaboration is key.
Really quick, just to swing it back to CubaOne really quick. One of the biggest obstacles for CubaOne and for me, because I've actually always wanted to work in Cuba. I always wanted to do some kind of a work or help or exchanges, and it's what CubaOne does, was that there was no opportunity, there was no window. It was impossible to do anything. 2015 changed a lot of things, and it's still difficult. But I never imagined working in Cuba. Never. It was always my dream. I lived in Brazil because it was the closest thing. I never imagined working in Cuba and working along Cuban people. It was always my dream. And I go there every few months now. And I work with them side by side. So again, it goes back, and CubaOne does these incredible projects that's bringing together Cuban Americans from all over and Cubans on the island and building bridges. This is the future. This is the future of Cuba, and this is the future of Miami as well. So again, sometimes the future doesn't exist yet. The future doesn't exist. But what you're meant for hasn't been invented yet, hasn't been done. And again, like you said, you owe it to that opportunity. As soon as you get that window, oh yeah, ahora la hora, this is the time. And CubaOne has been incredible, and Jenny and also Joey. And I'd like to thank CubaOne from the bottom of my heart for helping us and hosting this as well.
Yeah, we say a lot that Cuba existed as black and white photos in our lives before, and now it can be a place where it's real life friends and family. So with that, we'll open it up to the audience. If anyone has questions, please.
So the program description in the schedule says developing collaborations with Cuban millennials through art, film, and the LGBTQ movement. Can anyone elaborate on that, especially the last part, because it hasn't really been mentioned yet?
So we've had we're about to go on our second LGBTQ trip. It's going to be, I guess, 14 queer, lesbian, gay, trans, drag queens that have gone to Cuba with us. That programming's been very interesting. Alexis, who Antonio Trino mentioned, is a queer photographer. I'll go through his projects and what he's done since his trip, which was 2 years ago. He has come up as a queer trans photographer who went to Cuba with us. I think 16 years after he left Cuba. His dad stayed in Cuba and he came with his mother. His father didn't know anything about his identity, didn't know anything about how his art and the work he was doing. He went to Havana and Santa Clara with us for 7 days and then spent 6 weeks after the trip in Cuba. Stayed with his dad for the first 2 weeks doing photographs, getting to know him again, and then spent the next 4 weeks going around with LGBTQ organizers from Santa Clara that he met during the trip and also got in touch with beforehand. They were on a radio station where they were talking about Idahots and the kind of emerging community organizing that's going on in Cuba. He did a photo series that's been shown a couple places of trans folks in very small cities in Cuba, so the rural cities in Cuba. And we encourage and try to make the connections for that to happen, not just for Alexis, but for the other 13 folks that have gone on those LGBTQ trips. We do that with everybody who's up here too, but that is a big focus for our organization. 2 of our founders are LGBTQ, 3 people on our board are LGBTQ, and it's a kind of a core part of our organization. And this, we'll be posting more about this trip as it happens. They're going in May for 7 days.
That's great, thank you.
Yeah. Others?
Make one up.
Yeah.
How many are you from Hialeah? Anyone from Hialeah? Or are you all living in Kendall? Who's from Kendall? Who's born in Cuba? Who was born here? Who was born outside of Miami?
Great.
It's a good idea to live in Kendall because it's quite a drive from Hialeah. You get tráfico and madre. When I saw this Kendall campus, I gotta leave the house early.
We should have communicated.
Yeah.
We thought about it.
For those who were born in Cuba, I mean, we have 4 people up here whose parents came a long time ago. How do you feel having come to the United States from Cuba and seeing the exile community here?
Sorry for my English. Basically, when you, I've been living here for 3 years now, so it's not that much. So when you live in Cuba, they always say the same thing about the Cuban community here. They call the Cuban community here like the mafia in Tijuana, right? And then when you meet a lot of people here, they're not necessarily concerned about what is happening in Cuba, because I mean, when I see you guys trying to establish some connection with your origins, the way I see myself and many of my friends, they're like doing exactly the opposite. They're trying to No, they're trying to give up on that, you know. We've been through a lot of hard times over there, and we just want to forget, you know. We just want to forget. At least that's me. And when I see the people that have been living here for a while, I don't know. Sometimes I feel the same about when. At first, when I show up here, when I came in, I was trying to to reconnect with everybody. Like, hey, I live here in Cuba. I live in Boyeros, next to the airport.
Yeah.
And you know, I talked with several old people. Hey, do you remember this neighborhood? And they were like, yeah, whatever. Like, they don't mind. At least that was my impression. And now that I've been some time since I've been living here, I realized that the same thing is happening to me. You know, with at least that's my case. I don't wanna know anything about it. I'm lucky that I have my family here. So that's very important in that sense. For example, my friend here still have his family over there. It's not the same. But in my case, I came here just to listen to you and see what is your perspective on the subject. But I mean, I totally get how radical is a big part of the Cuban community, or the Cuban immigration. It's not the same as when you are born here from Cuban immigrants, that when you're Cuban and you live here, it's a totally different thing.
The same thing with the guayabera. I live in Cuba 23 years. I never went in guayabera. Me or all my friends, also my family. The only one who wear the guayaberas was the president, the unions, and all the political stuff. Because they want to give the idea that the guayabera is like Cuba, and guayabera is not Cuba. Guayabera is the images that Cuba wants to show the world. So every time that I see someone with the guayaberas, I say, Ecuador and Cuba. So
the same. I mean, with all due respect, I totally get your point, your thing. But we were talking about it, about the image of Cuba. You know, it's pretty much when you go to to Paris, and where do you go? You go to the Louvre, you go to the
Champs-Élysées, Arc de
the
Triomphe.
Arc de Triomphe, you know, to the Eiffel Tower. But you have the Arabian suburbs. You have other parts of Paris that when people won't necessarily relate to that image of the glorious Paris. Same thing with you. You have guayaberas, which I really like by the way. You have the guayaberas, you have the Cafecito, but of course we are more than that. I remember back in Cuba, we have this TV show called Huere la Viva, when a lot of rockers went there and played their music, and they were they always talk about this, they always make this point about what happened when people say, hey, you're Cuban, you should be doing son or salsa or reggaeton, you're not doing Cuban music, right? You're doing rock and roll and punk rock.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they were like, hey, this is Cuban rock and roll. This is punk. You don't have to be. You don't have to be. You don't have to enclose yourself in certain canon in order to be part of a community. That's what I think when I see the guayaberas, the cafecito. I start drinking a lot of cafecito now that I have.
Now that you're in college.
But before that, I mean, my experience with the cafe was like, it's not for me. But that's another. But the guayabera, with the guayabera thing and everything, and I mean, you know, I don't want to say like a caricature, because it's not that feeling, but it's of course more than that. But I totally get your point, because you feel another way. That's the way of connecting. with your urges, and I totally get it, man, for sure. I mean, I'm not saying that, but no, this is basically the feeling that we got from that project, from your work, which was okay. Good that you're starting from there. But I guarantee, man, there's a lot of things, beautiful things that the Cuban culture can offer you. Besides the song, the salsa, the reggaeton, which I hate.
The cubato.
So do I.
I don't know if you guys.
If I can really quick just touch on it, I understand what you're coming from, and I'm going to put it as bluntly as I can because I don't bite my tongue. There are people on the island that think Americans put a mojito and an umbrella in front of Cuba. That when you think of Cuba, you're thinking of cruise ships, the nice pretty cars, the Hotel Nacional. That's the worry and the concern of the Cuban people, I think, of what the Americans are doing to it. And I completely understand. And that's something that I had to worry about. Am I using the guayabera as a gimmick? Am I using the guayabera as a crutch? But, and you kind of caught it. I'm looking at the other side of it. It was something that really caught me off guard, is that cafecitos, empanadas, pastelitos, those things don't exist in Cuba. They're not Cuban. They're Miami. And that's kind of how I grew up, Miami Cuban, until I went to Cuba. Being in Regla, being in San Cristobal, in Viñales, being surrounded by mountains and no power, you realize there's a lot more to it, without a doubt. There's much more to it. I used it as my career. I used the guayabera as, this is the next 10 or 20 years of my life based on my culture of how I see it. So trust me, I know. People in Cuba, I never saw a guayabera in Cuba. The guayaberas I saw in Cuba were put together by repurposed fabric, because you can't get fabric in Cuba. So the guayabera is from 4 different shirts put together, and that's what they call a cool hipster guayabera. But you don't see a nice traditional guayabera on the street. You really don't. But it's the same as Miami. I try to sell a guayabera in Miami to a Cuban. He asks me if it's 20 bucks. My shirts are 100. He flips out, has a coronary, and leaves. So I understand it's a Cuban shirt, but it's not meant for Cubans, I guess. And that sucks, because that means there's some bitterness inside of you that thinks a shirt, a piece of fabric and cloth, means you support some kind of regime. It doesn't. It means that when you look at me, you already know I'm Cuban. When you approach me, you know you can say hola. You know I'll like a cafecito. It's my way of saying I'm Cuban and super proud of it without having to say anything to you. And I thought that would be easy in Miami, but believe it or not, it's not. California, Texas, love it. Miami, my home, where I thought I would flourish and blossom, is a backdrop for marketing, but it's where I connect to the people on the streets. It's the artists I connect to. It's the events that I go to. It's the organizations like this that mean more than anything.
There was 2 funny connections. The first time I went to Cuba was in 2015. I was hired as a tour guide with an Australian company. El primer lugar donde yo me quedé fue en Oaxaca, en Boyero, o Pantanal. Eso es en Carlos.
That's 2 miles away from
Yeah. Literally in the middle of nowhere, Havana, suburb of Havana, in a small place, in a little bathroom that had no door, y un cubito, you know? I'm an anthropologist at heart, so I respect and I admire and appreciate you expressing Cuban complexity. How important it is to understand not only Cuban, but human complexity, that we're not limited to stereotypes. If I hear La Guantanamera one more time in Central Havana or La Habana Vieja, I'm gonna throw myself out the window. Because in Cuba, you have so many different types of music and artists and emerging entrepreneurs now that you can. I have friends that are rockers and vegans in Cuba. You know, they're known for lechon and cafecito y pastelito, but that's the beauty. There's so many different types of Cubans, and on that note, there's Miami Cubans. And there's different types of Miami Cubans, and there's different decades and generations of Cubans that came to Miami, and you feel very different from how my family feels, or how my friends felt when they came in 2000. Cada cubano es diferente, al fin, we're all different. But that's the beauty, because we have a common thread, which is our roots in the island and even Miami. So, I completely agree with you.
You were talking, at some point you mentioned that some of you, or some of your parents came in the boat, and it's funny how within the Cuban community, we have these, I'll say, I don't know if to say racist, but every time we talk about the
Classes,
balseros, we mention,
Balacero.
it's a way of, it's funny, you know, like, these guys are balsero and we laugh at them. I mean, it's interesting. I don't like it at all. It's pretty much with Latin Americans. I don't want to mention all the terms that we all know, how we call them. But it's interesting. I was just remembering that.
It just happened to me 2 days ago. I was talking to my mom. I'm like, no, porque tal y tal. I was talking about the founder of El Dorado. I don't know if you guys know the story. So he came to the U.S. from Cuba, and his boat was called El Dorado. And my mom and I were talking about it, que grande, está El Dorado en Calle 8, and it's incredible, he's had such a success. And I'm like, no, porque la balsa se llamaba El Dorado. My mom's like, no era una balsa, era un bote. It wasn't a raft, it was a boat. I'm like, Mom, but he still came through the water. It's like, no, there's a big difference. Humans, I think it's very important to each of us tell our own stories, and there's a lot of details, but sometimes humans find an excuse to separate ourselves. We have to find more and more things that we have in common. And about the guayabera, really quick, I was in Paris, met some Cubans at a club in a bar. Tú eres, bueno, yo soy cubano de Miami. To me, it's the easiest thing, because if I say I'm American, they don't believe me. If I say I'm Cuban, were you born on the island? No. Entonces estoy en el medio ahí, ni allá ni aquí. And it's like, no, porque ustedes, cubanos de Miami, usan guayabera, y los cubanos no usan guayabera. And then se forma, because it's a big deal here, and it's not in Cuba, and then it goes back and forth, but it's great. It's great. These dialogues are very important, and CubaOne concentrates a lot of these dialogues. Let's understand each other. For me, the guayabera in Miami, because when you lose everything, you have very few things to hold on to. When you had to leave the island, for example, you had to leave everything. And sometimes the first Cubans, they'll strip you from everything. Sometimes you grab onto the little things, like a shirt. And sometimes, maybe it's not as traditional anymore. Maybe only the government people use it or whatever. Pero Miami era lo único que tenían porque no podían regresar a la isla. It was the only thing they had because they couldn't go back. It's like, no, this is Cuban, this is a piece of Cuba, and this is what I'm keeping. This is Cuban. Even if it's irrelevant in Cuba, it's still Cuban. Because it's a piece of Cuba that they can't have. As we know, a lot of Cubans haven't gone back. So for me, that's definitely a big symbol of Miami Cuban culture. And who knows, maybe it goes back, maybe it doesn't. I am interested to know what Cuba invents on its own, out of different influences. And then next rockers. I've gone to a rock concert in Cuba, it was a blast. I don't want to see salsa ni reggaeton, but yeah, it's understanding the complexity of culture and how culture does go back and forth. The last trip I did, I went to Cuba, I worked in a convent with seminary students. I took them una caja de pastelito de guayaba y queso from Vicky Bakery in Miami to Cuba. I said, by the way, estos sí son pastelitos directamente de Hialeah. No, que los pastelitos son de Cuba, estos son reales. They tried it like, no, estos sí son pastelitos, they're really good. So, I think we have to worry less about what's real and everything, and just exchange and see what you prefer, and let it grow organically.
Well, thank you everyone for coming. I know we just went a little bit over, but we'll stay up here for anyone that wants to come up and talk, ask questions about CubaOne or any of the projects that you've heard today. Put up our website and social media accounts. We've had over 5, I think, Miami Dade alumni go on our trip so far, and we'd love to have more people flying, so please reach out. Thank you very much.
Thank you.